They weren't afraid of your voice. They were afraid of your presence. Because when a chosen one walks into the room, something shifts. Unseen walls begin to crack. Masks slip. Eyes dart. And without saying a word, you expose the one thing no one wants to admit. That most people have built their lives around, lies they can't defend in the light. Here at Chosen One's Sanctuary, we don't flatter your comfort. We confront your calling. And if you're watching this, it's because heaven already marked you as different. Not different by personality, different by spiritual weight. There's something about your intensity, your stillness, your insight, your refusal to play small, that stirs people in ways even they don't understand. Some call it arrogance, others call it discomfort. But biblically, it's the mantle of the set apart. Think of Joseph, thrown into a pit not for what he did, but for what he carried. Think of Jesus, pushed to the edge of cliffs, not because he lied, but because he revealed. The truth is, you're not too much. You're just too real for systems built on pretense. And that's what makes people nervous. Today, we're going deep into the mystery of your presence. Why your very existence causes emotional whiplash in others. How your spiritual DNA disrupts status quos. And why your intensity isn't something to tone down. It's the very proof that you've already won. Stay with me until the end, because by the time we're done, you won't just understand why they fear your fire. You'll know exactly what God expects you to do with it. Let's begin. The unspoken war against the unexplainable. People don't always attack what they understand. Sometimes, what they fear most is the thing they can't name. And for the chosen ones, that fear becomes the unspoken war, not waged with weapons or slander, but with subtle distance, uneasy glances, and the quiet isolation of being misunderstood. You didn't break a rule. You didn't offend a custom. But your very presence cracked the illusion that comfort could coexist with compromise. There is something about the way you see straight through the noise. Your silence feels like discernment. Your gaze feels like exposure. You ask no questions, yet people scramble for justifications. That is the mark of divine intensity. It reveals without accusation, and it confronts without confrontation. You're not dangerous because of what you do. You're dangerous because of what you disrupt just by standing in the room. This isn't personal, it's spiritual. The moment a chosen one arrives, dormant spirits wake up. The status quo tightens its grip, and everyone who once felt secure now senses that their structure has a leak, not from the outside, but from the very light you carry. It was the same with Joseph. His brothers couldn't explain the rage they felt. All he had were dreams, cloaked in innocence. But those dreams threatened to undo their hierarchy. His vision exposed their stagnation. His favor revealed their famine. So they plotted to bury what they didn't understand. But heaven already knew the famine was coming, and the one they threw in the pit would one day be the one holding the keys to survival. Prophetic declaration: you are not the chaos. You are the clarity that chaos cannot survive. When the chosen one walks in, the masks itch, the power dynamics tremble, and the room, whether it knows it or not, begins to prepare for an encounter with truth. But not everyone welcomes that collision, because the next thing that happens is the burning realization that your fire is not dimmable. The weight of a spirit that doesn't dim. You've tried to tone it down, haven't you? That spiritual weight you carry, that fierce empathy, That way you sense things before they unfold. You thought maybe if you were quieter, softer, more agreeable, they'd stop calling you too intense. But chosen one, you were never meant to be adjustable. You were set apart, not to adapt, but to ignite. And what they call too much is exactly what makes you untouchable in the spirit. Your soul carries the frequency of heaven's urgency. There's a reason you feel things deeper, see things clearer, react to injustice like it stabbed your own skin. You carry the weight of intercession, of divine timing, of decisions that ripple through destinies you've never even met. This intensity is not a flaw. It is evidence that you are being forged in the same fire God used to prepare his prophets, just like Elijah. A man whose emotions ran wild, whose loneliness was raw, whose mantle could shift nations. His prayers called fire from the sky, but his soul still collapsed under the weight of it. God didn't rebuke his intensity. He whispered into it, because heaven speaks loudest to those who refuse to dim in order to survive. Prophetic insight. Your intensity is not emotional instability. It is spiritual responsibility. To try and dim what God ignited is to wage war against your own assignment. And if you continue to hide it, the ache will grow louder than the acceptance you're chasing. Because the light doesn't negotiate with darkness. It burns. And in that burning, it reveals what no one else has the courage to confront. But that confrontation is just the beginning. Because when light enters the room, shadows don't disappear. They panic. When light enters the room, shadows panic. There's a reason some people seem fine until you show up. Then suddenly, they shift. Their energy changes. Their words stumble. It's not because you're doing anything wrong. It's because your light just entered a room full of shadows that thought they were safe. As a chosen one, you carry a frequency that exposes. Not with condemnation, but with clarity. And clarity is confrontational to those who've built their lives in carefully shaded corners. You're not attacking them, you're just revealing them. That's what light does. It doesn't ask permission. It simply shows what's already been hiding. Think of Jesus in the temple, flipping tables not out of anger, but out of alignment. His presence alone exposed the hypocrisy of their systems. He didn't need to call out every lie. His very footsteps echoed truth too loud to ignore. In you, that same echo lives. It is why people grow silent mid-sentence, why secrets surface, why carefully curated images start to unravel around you. You are the divine alarm clock in a world that would rather sleep through its own deception. And the enemy knows it. That's why attacks often come when you didn't even speak. Why your name ends up in conversations you were never part of. Why some smile in public but crumble in private. Because their spirit can't lie in your presence. They call it vibes. But in heaven, it's called discernment. Prophetic declaration. You don't need to chase exposure. You carry it. There is a cost to this clarity. You will lose people, opportunities, applause. But what you gain is holy. The ability to see truth before it's spoken, and the strength to stand firm when others bow to comfort. Because once the shadows panic, they do everything they can to label your light as dangerous. They called it arrogance, but it was assignment. They said you were too confident, too direct. They said you made people uncomfortable, that you thought you were better, but that was never the truth, was it? The real truth is, you simply remembered who you were before they decided who you should be. And the moment you started living from that place of sacred memory, the accusations came. Not because you were arrogant, but because your assignment threatened their apathy. There is a holy difference between pride and clarity. Pride demands attention. Clarity walks in obedience, with no need to be seen. You were never trying to impress anyone. You were simply done pretending you didn't hear the call. David was mocked by his own brother for showing up on the battlefield. "Who do you think you are?" they sneered. But heaven had already anointed him in private. The oil had already spoken, and what looked like confidence to his brothers was covenant in motion. That's the thing about chosen ones. We don't need approval when we've already received instruction. You weren't arrogant for standing in your truth. You were obedient to the whisper that told you not to shrink. And yes, they will still talk. They'll project their fear as criticism. But remember, the louder the accusation, the closer you are to the target. Prophetic insight. Every label they placed on you will become the weapon God uses to prove them wrong. Ignore the echo of their doubt, because what they called pride was actually your permission, and what they tried to silence was the sound of purpose waking up. But that purpose has a price, and not all who fear you will attack you. Some will just leave, which leads to the quiet, painful proof that being chosen often feels like being rejected. Spiritual rejection is often a sign of spiritual promotion. Rejection hurts. It always has. But for the chosen ones, rejection isn't random. It's revelatory. It shows you where your spirit no longer fits, not because you failed, but because you've outgrown the disguise. You were never meant to blend in with environments you were sent to disrupt. So when they turned cold, distant, silent, it wasn't because you lost value. It was because your growth exposed the limits of their comfort. And comfort never promotes what it cannot control. Look at Jesus. In his own hometown, he was met with skepticism, not celebration. They couldn't reconcile the carpenter's son with the Messiah's mantle. And so they dismissed the divine because it came dressed in familiarity. He wasn't less anointed in Nazareth. They were just too small to see it. The same happens with you. As your light intensifies, those unwilling to confront their own stagnation will exit quietly or violently. But either way, the parting is divine, because heaven will not allow you to anchor your calling in places that tolerate you but do not recognize you. Prophetic declaration. Your rejection was heaven's redirection. What they called abandonment was actually elevation. And though you may grieve the loss, the friendships, the family, the sense of belonging, you must also bless it, because the tables they pulled away from were never big enough for the mission you now carry. But know this, the rejection wasn't just personal. It was a signal in the spirit that your promotion had already been signed. What God is building in you requires the room they could never offer. And now that you've been released from those limitations, the crown they didn't see is starting to shift the very atmosphere. The crown you wear is invisible until it's threatening. At first, they liked you. They even praised your humility, your kindness, your grace. But then something changed. You stopped asking for permission. You started walking with authority. And suddenly, your favor became offensive. Not because it hurt them, but because it revealed them. That's the nature of divine crowns. They are invisible to the eye, but undeniable in impact. People may not know why they react to you the way they do, but spiritually, they sense it. That what you carry is not ordinary, that the heavens have placed something on your life that their ego cannot compete with. It was the same with Saul and David. Saul wasn't jealous of David's songs. He was terrified of what the songs prophesied, that a new king had already been crowned in heaven, even if the earth hadn't caught up yet. That's you, chosen one. Your promotion doesn't start when people acknowledge it. It starts when God declares it. And that crown, it disrupts every insecure structure still clinging to counterfeit power. That's why some will try to belittle you, to control the narrative before your anointing speaks for itself. But you don't need to defend what heaven has already validated. Prophetic insight. The invisible crown is proof that you're dangerous to systems built on appearance instead of authenticity. Let them mislabel it. Let them misunderstand it. The crown is not for display. It's for warfare. And the more it shines, the more it awakens those who never wanted to see. But that awakening doesn't stop with individuals. It ripples outward, shaking systems, exposing thrones, and calling the silenced into their voice. Because what you're carrying doesn't just change who is in the room. It changes how the room operates. The shift you cause isn't just personal. It's prophetic. You thought it was just awkward energy, just a cold stare here, a hushed conversation there. But what you were feeling was a spiritual shift, not just a social one. Because when a chosen one enters the room, the entire atmosphere is rearranged, not out of arrogance, but by design. You don't just change people, you change systems. Conversations slow, agendas falter, power dynamics that once flowed, unquestioned, suddenly start to fracture. You weren't trying to be a threat, you just were. Because your obedience to heaven destabilizes anything built on compromise. This isn't about popularity or attention. It's about alignment. Your very existence calls people to accountability, to look at what they've ignored, excused, or manipulated, not because you ask them to, but because the spirit within you holds a mirror too honest to turn away from. Esther knew that kind of shift. She walked into a palace that didn't know what she carried. And by the time she revealed her identity, the entire system of power had already started to tremble. Her presence was the prophecy. Her courage was the turning point. And her crown didn't make her chosen. Her willingness did. That's your story too. You're not always placed in perfect environments. You're often planted in dangerous ones, but not to blend in, to confront, disrupt, and redefine what power looks like. Prophetic declaration. Your presence is the permission others have been waiting for. When you stand in rooms with your shoulders back and your truth unhidden, people start remembering their own. When you walk without apology, others begin to question who taught them to shrink. And in that questioning, a system begins to crumble. Not because you fought it, but because you showed up. This is your assignment. Not just to be seen, but to be the seed of structural awakening. The shift you carry shakes more than conversations. It shakes kingdoms. And if you ever feel tempted to dim that power for acceptance, there's something you must remember. What you hide to survive will eventually suffocate your calling. Consequences of dimming for acceptance. Every time you shrink to make others comfortable, you delay what heaven sent you to confront. Every compromise feels small, a silence instead of a truth, a smile instead of a boundary, a detour instead of the path. But chosen one, nothing about your fire was meant to be managed. You were not anointed to fit. You were anointed to ignite. There is a sacred grief that lives in those who dim themselves to be loved. A quiet mourning of what could have been had they just stood in their fullness, and many never recover from it. Moses almost did the same. When God called him at the burning bush, he tried to disqualify himself. "I'm not eloquent," he said, as if divine destiny depends on human comfort. But God didn't need his eloquence. He needed his yes. The enemy doesn't always fight you by force. Sometimes he seduces you into silence, into second-guessing the very thing that makes you dangerous to the darkness. Prophetic insight. The most effective attack on a chosen one is convincing them to dim what hell already fears. And here's the tragedy. The people you dimmed for will never carry the cost of what you lost by doing it. Only you will feel the erosion of your fire. But here is the hope. You can still turn the flame back up. You can still decide that your light deserves to be seen, even if it offends. That your truth deserves to be heard, even if it disrupts. That your mission is worth more than their comfort. Because the moment you stop asking for permission is the moment purpose begins. And when that fire returns, it doesn't just restore you. It starts a chain reaction in everyone watching. As heaven whispers, now they remember too. The mission behind the intensity. There's a reason your energy feels like it doesn't belong. Why every room you've entered since childhood felt too shallow for your depth. Why people whisper behind your back, not because they hate you, but because they can't define you. That pressure you carry, the spiritual weight, the emotional range, the radar for injustice, is not a coincidence. It's evidence of assignment, of divine deployment, of a mantle forged in silence and lit in fire. You were not born to be digestible. You were born to be disruptive. The world trains people to be palatable, predictable, pleasing. But God doesn't raise prophets for comfort. He raises them to confront. And every part of your intensity, your high sensitivity, your unrelenting conviction, your refusal to pretend, is connected to your kingdom mandate. Jeremiah knew this mission. He wept while carrying it, called too young, too raw, too passionate. But God put fire in his bones, not to entertain, but to warn a generation losing its way. He didn't choose the calling. The calling chose him, and it's choosing you too. Your mission is not always a title or a platform. It is the way you walk into rooms and rearrange frequencies. It is the way you sense danger before it shows its face. It is the way your words carry weight, even when few are listening. Prophetic declaration. You were not sent to fit the atmosphere. You were sent to change it. But missions carry pressure, and many chosen ones collapse not because they're weak, but because no one taught them that this intensity is not dysfunction. It's divine tension. Ignore it, and the mission misfires. Deny it, and the calling grows heavy. But embrace it, fully, boldly, unapologetically, and it becomes revelation in motion. Because your life, when surrendered, becomes a living prophecy. And every trial, every misunderstanding, every rejection you've endured wasn't meant to break you. It was meant to build a vessel strong enough to carry glory without leaking. And now, the world is watching, not to see if you survive, but to witness what happens when a chosen one finally stops running and begins to walk in the full weight of their light. The fire is no longer optional. It is time. There is a sacred cost to carrying fire. To walk through this world as a chosen one is to live with your soul tuned to a higher frequency, one that burns through illusion, shakes systems, and reawakens what others buried just to survive. But maybe the most humbling truth is this: your intensity is not the obstacle. It is the invitation. An invitation for the world to remember what it forgot, to feel what it numbed, to rise into what it feared was never possible. In a time when darkness has become decor and truth feels negotiable, you are not here to adjust. You are here to anoint, to be the remnant that doesn't just believe God is still speaking, but proves it with every step, every word, every room you refuse to shrink in. The world is not offended by your flaws. It is terrified of your clarity. And what they cannot label, they try to silence. But heaven already named you. Prophetic seal statement: you are not too much. You are precisely measured for the mission. You do not need to dim. You were born to disrupt. You are the proof that God's glory can walk into any room and shift everything. If this word awakens something ancient in you, if you've spent years questioning your intensity, your spiritual weight, your divine discomfort, know this: you're not broken. You're becoming. We invite you to like this video if it brought confirmation to your spirit. Subscribe to Chosen One's Sanctuary to walk with a community that sees you, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next word tailor-made for your assignment. Share this message with someone who's been misunderstood for their light, and in the comments, tell us, what did this reveal about the fire you carry? What mask is beginning to fall now that you remember who you are? Until next time, walk boldly, speak carefully, and burn unapologetically.